think a lot of people have probably heard about the American Airlines situation. It's very simple.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
I said yes.
Oh, yeah. And so what's going on is that American Airlines is finally sort of facing the reality that their labor costs are unsustainable as well. And so they're trying to go through the normal restructuring process. They're actually one of the last airlines to go through that. But for a long time now, they've had the highest labor costs in the industry. So what their labor unions are doing is trying to go over their head and disrupt that normal restructuring process by negotiating a preliminary contract with a potential merger partner in U.S. Air. And so that's sort of another act of desperation that we're seeing. Their own unsustainable benefits have created the problem in the first place, and now what they want to do is try to continue that in a potential merger with U.S. Air instead of going through the very necessary restructuring process through normal courtroom and bankruptcy procedures. And so these are all sort of various tactics that we're seeing from organized labor. And by the way, for all the listeners out there, we always make a very important distinction between union bosses and big labor chiefs versus rank and file employees, because they're very, very different. Many times, the leaders of these unions do not represent the actual interests of the everyday employees who are forced to pay dues and support causes through their paychecks, political causes that they don't support. And so whether it's in Wisconsin or what you're seeing with the attempt to interfere with American Airlines restructuring, they realize that they can't continue with these sorts of benefits, but they're fighting tooth and nail, and they're going to disrupt it as long as they can.
Tim, as you mentioned, American Airlines has the highest labor cost in the industry. And just to give our listeners an idea, American Airlines pays out around 28% of its revenue to labor, whereas that Delta, United Airlines, and U.S. Airways pay anywhere from 17 to 20%. Now, that is a huge difference when you're talking about payout. And a lot of this is because of unions. Now, several years ago, maybe a couple of decades now, United Airlines went through restructuring where actually that the employees took over the unions. Was that successful?
Well, in the past, whether it's a U.S. Air merger in history or what we're seeing with Continental United right now, a lot of those mergers have not been very successful, and you see a lot of the continuing problems within the industry itself. But, it kind of creates this mosaic almost where you take individual pieces, whether it's the Continental United problems right now, or the American Airlines, or anything else, and you take a step back and you see it from a broader perspective, and it creates this larger illustration of the types of interference that we're talking about here, and the very self-serving, frankly, agenda of the big labor bosses. Again, they really diverge with everyday employees, because if you've got unsustainable benefits of the type we're talking about with American Airlines, it doesn't do rank and file employees any good to impose on them or force or demand benefits and wages and those sorts of things that can't be paid, because then eventually the airline goes out of business and they lose their jobs. Whereas if you compromise and you come to something that's a little more reasonable, then at least the airline continues and you can go forward in a sustainable manner, and the jobs are kept. And so what we see instead from the big labor bosses is they want just more and more dues coming in on a short-term basis that they can in turn spend on political campaigns that don't necessarily match those of the employees. So it really creates an ugly picture, and I don't certainly mean to slam all union members, and there are certainly justifications for the existence of unions. But the type of behavior you see from some of those labor leaders, it's ultimately suicidal.